Good morning, ghouls and goblins. Welcome to day 3 of a dramatic reading of Pride and Prejudice versus Zombies. And Zombies. I've always been saying it's versus, but I guess it is and Zombies. Oh, maybe it's the movie that made me think of it was versus. So where we last left off, essentially, Jane went over to where Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley were on horse during the rain, and there was zombies everywhere. So they got a letter back the next day from a servant saying that she was sick and feeling ill, and so fearing the worst, Elizabeth went on her own, in full modesty, just wearing a dress and a dagger on her ankle, because she's not allowed to have a musket or a sword because that would be unladylike of her, apparently. I don't know. But anyway, she kicked the ass out of 3 zombies, kicked one straight in the head, and it burst into bones and brains or something like that. Brittle bones and... Excuse me. But, yeah, so... Then she made it to the house, and now that's where she's staying. And she just got sent back someone to fetch her favorite musket. So, yes. Again, well, my name is Mars, and welcome to Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Drinking my coffee. It's the morning. A little bit chilly today, so I'm wearing a toque. Oops, won't hit that. Alright, so let's just get started, alright? Whoa. Lost the page right there. Got it. Chapter 8. At 5 o'clock, Elizabeth retired to meditate and dress, and at 6:30 she was summoned to dinner. Jane was by no means better. The sisters, on hearing this, repeated 3 or 4 times how much they were grieved, how shocking it was to have a bad cold, and how excessively they disliked being ill themselves, and then thought no more of the matter. Their indifference towards Jane was not immediately before them restored Elizabeth to her former dislike. When not immediately before them, restored Elizabeth to her former dislike. Their brother, Mr. Bingley, was the only one of the party whom she could regard with any complacency. His anxiety for Jane was evident, and his attentions to herself most pleasing, and they prevented her feeling herself so much an intruder as she believed she was considered by the others. Oh, well, that's nice. He's taking care of her. Oh, yes, if you don't know, Jane and Mr. Bingley have been falling in love, and Mr. Darcy has been very, I don't know. He's impressed with Elizabeth. He's definitely got the hots for her, I think, but he's also full of himself, so no one's really into Mr. Darcy. When dinner was over, Elizabeth returned directly to Jane, and Miss Bingley began abusing her as soon as she was out of the room. Her manners were pronounced to be very bad indeed, a mixture of pride and impertinence. She had no conversation, no style, no beauty. Mrs. Hurst thought the same, and added, "She has nothing, in short, to recommend her, but being well schooled in the ways of combat. I shall never forget her appearance this morning. She really looked almost wild." "She did indeed, Louisa. Why must she be scampering about the country in such dangerous times? Because her sister has a cold. Her hair so untidy, so blousy. Yet, yes, and her petticoat. I hope you saw her petticoat 6 inches deep in mud? I am absolutely certain. And pieces of undead flesh upon her sleeves, no doubt from her attackers. Well, I'm guessing these ladies are going to die. Because they care about her looks. Your picture may be very exact, Louisa," said Bingley, "but this was all lost upon me. I thought Miss Elizabeth Bennet looked remarkably well when she came into the room this morning. Her dirty petticoat quite escaped my notice." "You observed it, Mr. Darcy, I am sure," said Miss Bingley, "and I am inclined to think that you would not wish to see your sister make such an exhibition." "Certainly not. Certainly not," said Mr. Darcy. "To walk 3 miles or whatever it is above her ankles in dirt, and alone, quite alone, with the unmentionable menace, dragging poor souls off the road into their doom in day and night. What could she mean by it? It seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence, a most country town indifference to decorum. It shows an affection for her sister that is very pleasing, said Bingley. I am afraid, Mr. Darcy, observed Miss Bingley in a half-whisper, that this attention has rather affected your admiration of her fine eyes.
Not at all, he replied. They were bright and finely exercised.
A short pause followed the speech, and Mrs. Hurst began again. Oh, he was just like, oh, no, she actually looked great. Oh, I mean, I didn't mean to say that. I have an excessive regard for Miss Jane Bennet, but she is really a very sweet girl. Sorry, just need some actual water. Bum bum bum. I have an excessive regard for Miss Jane Bennet. She is really a very sweet girl, and I wish with all my heart she were well settled. But with such a father and mother, and such low connections, I'm afraid there is no chance of it. I think I have heard you say their uncle is an attorney on Meryton? Yes, and they have another, who lives somewhere near Cheapside. That is capital. Oh, that's her sister. That is capital, added her sister, and they both laughed heartily. If they had uncles to fill all Cheapside, cried Bingley, it would not make one of them jot less agreeable. Have you no regard for them as warriors? Indeed, I've never seen ladies so steady-handed in combat. It's like, okay, again, this is written, obviously, by Jane Austen and Seth Grahame-Smith. And Seth Grahame-Smith wrote the zombies part, right? I'm pretty sure he just kind of added it in his quips. But it's like, moments like that, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm reading Pride and Prejudice. Oh yeah, I'm reading zombies. Oh yeah, I'm reading Pride and Prejudice now. Oh yeah, I'm reading zombies. It's a little bit silly. For instance, like, when it was like, have you no regard for them as warriors? I'm pretty sure that part right there, you could cut that, and the other bit before it would have been in Pride and Prejudice. Less agreeable. Anyways, it doesn't matter. But it must very materially lessen their chance of marrying men, of any consideration in the world. Oh, that was Darcy, replied Darcy. To his speech, Bingley made no answer, but his sister gave it the hearty assent. With a renewal of tenderness, however, they returned to Jane's room on leaving the dining parlour, and sat with her till summoned to coffee. She was still very poorly, and Elizabeth would not quit her at all till late in the evening. When she had the comfort of seeing her sleep, and when it seemed to rather right than pleasant that she should go downstairs herself. On entering the drawing-room, she found the whole party at cards, and was immediately invited to join. But suspecting them to be playing high, she declined it, and making her sister the excuse, and she would assume herself for the short time she could stay below with a book. Mr. Hurst looked at her with an astonishment. Did I give Mr. Hurst like a puffy voice before? I think I did. Yeah, because he was at the party, wasn't he?
Do you prefer reading to cards, said he. That is rather singular.
I prefer a great many things to cards, Mr. Hurst, said Elizabeth, not the least of which is the sensation of a newly sharpened blade as it punctures the round belly of a man. Mr. Hurst was silent for the remainder of the evening. In nursing your sister, and I am sure you have pleasure, said Bingley, and I hope it will soon be increased by seeing her quite well. Elizabeth thanked him, and then walked towards the table where a few books were lying. He immediately offered to fetch her others, all that his library afforded. And I wish my collection were larger to benefit and my own credit, but I am an idle fellow, and though I have not many, I have more than I have ever looked into. Elizabeth assured him that she could suit herself perfectly with those in the room. I am astonished, said Miss Bingley, that my father should have left so small a collection of books. What a delightful library you have at Pemberley, Mr. Darcy.
It ought to be good, he replied. It has been the work of many generations.
And then you have added so much to it yourself. You're always so buying books.
I cannot comprehend the neglect of a family library in such days as these. What have we to do but stay indoors and read till the cure is at last discovered?
Elizabeth turned her attention away from a book and drew near to the card table, and stationed herself between Mr. Bingley and his eldest sister to observe the game.
Is Mr. Darcy much growing since the spring? Is Miss Darcy much grown since the spring? Said Miss Bingley. Will she be as tall as I am?
Well, I think she will. She's now about Miss Elizabeth Bennet's height, or rather taller.
How I long to see her again. I never met with anybody who delighted me so much. Such a countenance, such manners, and so extremely accomplished for her age.
It is amazing to me, said Bingley, how young ladies can have patience to be so very accomplished as they all are.
All young ladies accomplished, my dear Charles. What do you mean? They all paint tables, cover screens, and net purses. I scarcely know anyone who cannot do all this, and I am sure I never heard a young lady spoken of for the first time without being informed that she is very accomplished.
The word is applied, said Darcy, to many women who deserves it no otherwise than by netting a purse or covering a screen. My sister Georgina deserves the distinction, however, for she is not only master of the female arts, but the deadly as well. I cannot boast of knowing more than half a dozen in the whole range of my acquaintance that are thus accomplished.
Nor I am sure, said Miss Bingley.
Then, Mr. Darcy, observed Elizabeth,
you must comprehend a great deal in your idea of accomplished women.
A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages. She must be well trained in fighting styles of Kyoto masters and the modern tactics and weaponry of Europe. Besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved. All this she must possess, and to all this she must yet add something more substantial, and the improvement of her mind by extensive reading. Yeah, and what do you gotta offer, Mr. Darcy? Just fucking money and a limp dick? I'm sorry. Ooh. I don't know. He's just asking so much of her.
I'm no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder now at your knowing any.
Exactly, Elizabeth. How are you going to find anyone with that much of a criteria checklist?
Are you so severe upon your own sex as to doubt the possibility of all this? I never saw such a woman. In my experience, a woman is either highly trained or highly refined. One cannot afford the luxury of both in such times. As for my sisters and I, our dear father thought it best that we give up less of our times to books and music, and more to protecting ourselves from the sorry stricken. Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley both cried out against the injustice of her implied doubt, and were both protesting that they knew many women who answered this description. When Mr. Hurst called them to order, all conversation was thereby at an end. Elizabeth soon afterwards left the room. Oh, well, it sounds like a big argument. I kind of got involved myself. Elizabeth Bennet, said Miss Bingley, when the door was closed on her, is one of those young ladies who seek to recommend themselves to the other sex by undervaluing their own, and with many men, I dare say, it succeeds. But in my opinion, it is paltry device, a very mean art. It really doesn't sound like she was doing that. It really doesn't sound like they're being nice to her at all.
Undoubtedly, replied Darcy, to whom with this remark was chiefly addressed. There is a meanness in all arts which ladies sometimes condescend to employ for captivation. Whatever bears affinity to cunning is despicable. Miss Bingley was not so entirely satisfied with this reply as to continue the subject. Elizabeth joined them again, only to say that her sister was worse, and that she could not leave her. Bingley urged Mr. Jones being sent for immediately, while his sister, convinced that no country advice could be of any service, recommended an express to town for one of the most eminent physicians. This she would not hear of. It was too dangerous to dispatch a rider at night. But she was willing to comply with their brother's proposal, and it was settled that Mr. Jones should be sent for early in the morning, if Miss Bennet was not decidedly better. Bingley was quite uncomfortable. His sister declared that they were miserable. They solaced their wretchedness, however, by duets after supper, while he could find no relief to his feelings than by giving his housekeeper directions that every attention might be paid to the sick lady and her sister. Well, at least Mr. Bingley's kind of taking care of her. I don't know. There's a lot of the book left, so things are gonna change. Right now, not on the. I don't like this house right now. These house of people just sound so stuck up and rude. And I'm just like, Chapter 9. Elizabeth passed the chief at the night in her sister's room, and in the morning had the pleasure. Okay, I'm gonna start that over. Elizabeth passed the chief of the night in her sister's room, and in the morning had the pleasure of being able to send a tolerable answer to the inquiries which she had very early received from Mr. Bingley by a housemaid. She requested to have a note sent to Longbourn, desiring her mother to visit Jane and form her own judgment of the situation. The note was immediately dispatched, but the rider was met with a group of freshly unearthed zombies on the road and dragged off to his presumable demise. See, that's what I was thinking this last time. It's like they're sending everybody off to go, like, tell the other house, like, ooh, bring my musket. Ooh, tell my sister she's sick. You know? What if these servants die? Why is anyone, like, just going out? This should be, like, an armed... People shouldn't be writing letters. It's like... I guess they have to, right? I don't know. The note was dispatched a second time with more success, because who cares about the servants, and its contents as quickly complied with Mrs. Bennet. The note was dispatched a second time with more success, and its contents as quickly complied with Miss Bennet, accompanied by her 2 youngest girls and their longbows, reached Netherfield soon after the family breakfast. Well, it's really not that far then. Okay. Never mind. Still. Had she found Jane in an apartment danger of having the strange plague, Mrs. Bennet would have been very miserable, but being satisfied on seeing her that the illness was not alarming, she had no wish of her recovering immediately, as her restorations to health would probably remove her from Netherfield. She would not listen, therefore, to her daughter's proposal of being carried home. Neither did the apothecary, who arrived about the same time, think it all advisable. Bingley met them with hopes that Mrs. Bennet had not found Miss Bennet worse than she expected. "Indeed I have, sir," was her answer. "She is a great deal too ill to be moved. Mr. Jones says we must not think of moving her. We must trespass a little longer on your kindness." Well, that's nice. "Removed!" cried Bingley. "It must not be thought of." Mr. Bingley's like, "Nah, leave her here, man. She can stay as long as you want. Just getting to know her." Miss Bennet was profuse in her acknowledgments. "I am sure," she added, if it was not for such good friends, I do not know what would become of her, for she is very ill indeed, and suffers a vast deal, though with a great patience in the world, no doubt due to her many months under the tutelage of Master Liu." Might it be expected that this gentleman here in Hertfordshire... Might I expect to meet this gentleman here in Hertfordshire? Asked Bingley. "I rather think you shan't," she replied, "for he has never left the confines of the Shaolin Temple in the Henan province. It was there that our girl spent many a long day being trained to endure all manners of discomfort." "May I inquire as to the nature of this discomfort?" "You may inquire," said Elizabeth, "though I would much prefer you to give you a demonstration." "Lizzie!" cried her mother, "remember where you are, and do not run on the wild manner that you are suffered to do at home." "I hardly knew you to possess such character," said Bingley. "My own character is of little consequence," replied Elizabeth. "It is the character of others which concerns me. I devote a great many hours of study to it." "The country," said Darcy, can in general supply but a few subjects for such a study. In a country neighborhood, you move in a very confined and unvarying society." What does that mean? See, sometimes I stutter because this is just so hard to understand. Like, what does that sentence mean? The country can in general supply but a few subjects for such a study. I guess. Okay, I get that. It means there's not many people in this country that you can study from. In a country neighborhood, you move in a very confined and unvarying society. Just say there's not like a lot of people like that around here. This is just ridiculous. Mind my lighting. Yes, indeed. No. Excepting, of course, when the country is overrun with the same unmentionables as town. "Yes, indeed," cried Miss Bennet, offended by his manner of mentioning a country neighborhood. "I assure you there is quite as much of that going on in the country as in town,
Everybody was surprised, and Darcy, after looking at her for a moment, turned silently away. Miss Bennet, who fancied she had gained a complete victory over him, continued in her triumph. I cannot see that London has any great advantage over the country, particularly since the wall was built. It may be a fortress replete with shops, but it is a fortress nonetheless, and hardly fit for the fragile nerves of a gentle lady. The country is a vast deal pleasanter. Is it not, Mr. Bingley? When I am in the country, he replied, I wish to never leave it, and when I am in town, it is pretty much the same. They have each their advantages, both in regards to the plague and otherwise. For while I sleep more soundly in the safety of town, I find my general disposition much improved by my present surroundings. Aye, this is because you have the right disposition. But that gentleman, looking at Darcy, seemed to think the country was nothing at all. Indeed, mamma. Oh, that was Mrs. Bennet. Sorry, my voice is. They don't say sometimes. Indeed, mamma, you are not mistaken. Indeed, mamma, you are mistaken," said Elizabeth, blushing for her mother. "You quite mistook Mr. Darcy. He only meant that there was not such a variety of people to be met in the country as in the town, which you must acknowledge to be true. Just as Mr. Darcy would surely acknowledge that the scarcity of graveyards makes the country altogether more agreeable in times such as these." Certainly, my dear, but as to not meeting with many people in this neighbourhood, I believe there are few neighbourhoods larger. I know we dine with 24 families. Well, 23, I suppose. God rest poor Miss Long's soul. Oh my gosh. Right, the one who got her skull cracked open by the teeth of a zombie. With Zombo. Wild. Alright, we're reaching the end of chapter 9 here. I'm gonna stop it at that, and I'm just gonna make another video after that, I think. So, just to make it quicker to upload, I hope, and also just make it more palatable. Alrighty. Darcy only smiled, and the general pause which ensued made Elizabeth tremble. She longed to speak, but she could think of nothing to say, and after a short silence, Miss Bennet began repeating her thanks to Mr. Bingley for his kindness to Jane, with an apology for troubling him also with Lizzie. Mr. Bingley was unaffectedly civil in his answer, and forced his young sister to be civil as well, and say what the occasion required. She performed her part, indeed, with much graciousness, but Mrs. Bennet was satisfied, and soon afterwards ordered her carriage. Upon this signal, the youngest of the daughters put herself forward. The two young girls had been whispering to each other during the whole visit, and the result of it was that the youngest should tax Mr. Bingley with having promised on his first coming into the country to give a ball at Netherfield. Oh. Lydia was a stout, well-grown girl of 15, with a fine complexion and a good-humoured countenance. She had every bit of Lizzie's deadly nature, though little of her sense, and had vanquished her first unmentionable at the remarkable age of 7 1/2 years. She was very equal, therefore, to address Mr. Bingley on the subject of the ball, and abruptly reminded him of his promise, adding that it would be the most shameful thing in the world if he did not keep it. His answer to this sudden attack was delightful to the mother's ear. "I am perfectly ready, I assure you, to keep my engagement, and when your sister is recovered, you shall, if you please, name the very day of the ball. But you would not wish to be dancing when she is ill." Lydia declared herself satisfied. "Oh, yes, it would be much better to wait till Jane was well, and by that time, most likely, Captain Carter would be at Meryton again. And when you have given your ball," she added, "I shall insist on giving another one. I shall tell Colonel Forster it will be quite the shame if he does not." Forster, okay, well. Mrs. Bennet and her daughters then departed, and Elizabeth returned instantly to Jane, leaving her own and relations' behaviour to the remarks of the two ladies and Mr. Darcy, the latter of whom, however, could not be prevailed on to join in their censure of her, in spite of all Miss Bingley's witticisms on fine eyes. Got hots for Elizabeth. So anyways, that is chapter 9. We'll pause it here for now. Come back in a little bit and read the next one. Yeah, I'm just going to grab a snack probably and then eat and then come back and read. But Yeah, nothing too much in zombies yet. We're getting more into the relations of everyone. They're gonna host a ball. I mean, there was a zombie attack at the last ball, so once Jane's up and well, maybe the next ball will have another zombo attack. We'll see. But yeah, thanks for watching.
Peace.